a cardinal who spent 5 years as the highest doctrinal authority in the Catholic Church, the man appointed by Benedict XVI to guard the deposit of faith from within the most sensitive dicastery in Rome, sat down for an interview and said what cardinals do not say. He said that restricting the traditional Mass is not merely a pastoral miscalculation, it is dogmatically untenable. Those two words, coming from that man in that context, mean something very specific. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what they mean, why they were said now, and why the people most threatened by them have responded with the one weapon they always reach for first: silence. On May 27, 2026, the German Catholic website cath.net published an interview with Cardinal Gerhard Ludwig Müller. The journalist was Lothar Rinker. The questions were direct, the answers were more direct still. On June 7th, the magazine Catholic World Report translated the interview into English and released it to a global readership. The title the editors chose was not a statement, it was a question. Is there a schism in the air? The question hangs there because the cardinal's answers do not resolve it comfortably in either direction. They do something more unsettling. They diagnose the wound with the precision of someone who has spent decades studying the anatomy of the body it belongs to. Before the words, the man. Cardinal Gerhard Ludwig Müller was born on December 31, 1947 in Mainz, Germany. He served as Bishop of Regensburg from 2002 to 2012. From 2012 to 2017, he was prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the dicastery that has historically borne responsibility for maintaining the integrity of Catholic teaching against error, deviation, and misrepresentation. He was appointed to that position by Benedict XVI. In 2017, Pope Francis chose not to renew his mandate when the 5-year term concluded. Francis had created him a cardinal in 2014. The relationship between the two men is therefore not simple, not hostile in any crude sense, but defined by a divergence that this interview makes visible. This matters because of what Müller is not. He is not a traditionalist blogger writing from outside the institutional church. He is not a retired bishop with a grievance and a podcast. He is the man who, for 5 years, read every theological challenge that came across the desk of the Church's highest doctrinal office, and formulated the Church's response to it. He knows the magisterium not as a reader knows a text, but as a surgeon knows an anatomy. When he uses a word like dogmatically, he is not reaching for emphasis. He is making a precise classificatory judgment that carries technical weight within the very system he spent 5 years administering. The passage that stopped people when they read it concerns Traditionis Custodes, the 2021 document by which Pope Francis imposed severe restrictions on the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass. Müller writes that a mere disciplinary suppression of the ancient rite and the generalized suspicion toward those attached to it, as though they were somehow deniers of the Second Vatican Council, is not only pastorally questionable, but dogmatically unsustainable. Dogmatically unsustainable, not liturgically inconvenient, not pastorally ill-advised, dogmatically unsustainable. The distinction matters enormously. A pastoral error can be corrected by a different pastoral decision. A dogmatic error touches something that pastoral authority was never competent to touch in the first place. What Müller is saying, in the precise language of the tradition he spent 5 years defending, is that the suppression of the ancient rite exceeds the boundaries of what disciplinary authority can legitimately do. He is not appealing to sentiment or to the preferences of those who love the old Mass. He is appealing to the theological limits of the power that issued the restriction. He does not stop there. He goes further in a direction that takes courage of a different kind, the courage to criticize an institutional body by name of function, if not by individual name. He refers to what he calls authoritarian agitators in the Roman dicastery for the liturgy, those who have failed to distinguish between the substance of the sacraments and the liturgical forms through which they are celebrated. The sacraments are not identical to any single form of their celebration. The Church has always known this. The tradition has always held this. A dicastery that treats the ancient form of the Mass as though it were a doctrinal threat to the sacrament itself has confused two things that theology has always carefully separated. Müller names the confusion and names the institution responsible for propagating it, even if he stops short of naming individuals. On the question of schism itself, the interview is worth reading with care because Müller refuses the easy positions available to him. He does not dismiss the possibility of schism as alarmist. He does not celebrate it as the inevitable purification of the Church. He calls it what it is: a wound inflicted on the body of Christ, a grave loss, a real pain. But he adds something that traditionalist readers in particular will find uncomfortable. He states clearly that the Society of St. Pius X cannot conceive of itself as a holy remnant of the one true Church. The logic he applies is simple and devastating. It is inconceivable, he writes, that 2,000 bishops gathered in council and every pope since have been wrong on dogmatic questions, with the sole exception of a single bishop. Archbishop Lefebvre may have been right about many things, but the architecture of that claim, one man correct against the universal episcopate, is not one that Catholic ecclesiology can accommodate. Müller criticizes both sides. He criticizes Rome for treating the ancient rite as a doctrinal problem requiring suppression. He criticizes Econ for treating itself as the remnant church standing against universal apostasy. He refuses to give either camp the validation it wants, and this is precisely why the interview has circulated so widely among people who do not usually agree with each other, and why it has been met with such careful, calibrated silence from the institutions most implicated by it. While Müller was giving this interview in Germany, something else was happening in Milan. The parish of San Giovanni Bosco in the Baggio neighborhood included in the program of the 2026 Summer Oratory, a dedicated space for Islamic prayer, made available for Muslim children participating in the camp. The parish priest, Don Giovanni Salatino, described it as a gesture of respect and inclusion. He added, in direct quotation, that Christians and Muslims pray to the same God. The Archdiocese of Milan published coverage of the summer camp, describing it as inclusive and open to dialogue. 26 years before that parish opened its doors to Islamic prayer, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, signed a document called Dominus Iesus. That document, approved by John Paul II in 2000, states explicitly that considering the Church as one way of salvation alongside others constituted by other religions is contrary to the Catholic faith. Not pastorally imprudent, contrary to the Catholic faith. The man who heads the same dicastery Ratzinger led 20 years later writes that suppressing the traditional Mass is dogmatically unsustainable. Meanwhile, a few kilometers from the Milan Cathedral, a summer oratory opens a liturgical space to another religion with the published approval of the Archdiocese. These two stories are not unrelated. They are the same story told from two ends of the same thread. At one end, Catholics who have maintained fidelity to the ancient rite of the Church are treated as suspected rejectors of the Council, subjected to restrictions that the former head of the doctrinal office calls dogmatically untenable. At the other end, a parish that tells Muslim children they worship the same God as Christians and arranges space for Islamic prayer within a Catholic oratory is described by the local archdiocese as inclusive and open to dialogue. No doctrinal intervention, no clarification issued, no reference made to Dominus Iesus or to any of the other documents that speak with absolute precision about exactly this question. What this produces is not a complicated theological situation requiring nuanced pastoral navigation. It is a legible pattern. The ancient rite, which carries within it the entire doctrinal and liturgical DNA of the Latin Church, is treated as a threat. A practice that would have required formal doctrinal correction under every pope from Leo XIII to Benedict XVI is described as a gesture of inclusion. The measuring instrument has been recalibrated, and Müller, the man who spent 5 years as the keeper of that instrument, is saying so in print. The interview proposes a concrete path forward for the Society of St. Pius X, a personal prelature, a canonical structure that would allow the society to maintain its liturgical and spiritual identity while remaining fully within the visible church. The condition attached to this proposal is equally concrete. The society would need to accept the magisterium in its entirety, including the doctrinal decisions of the Second Vatican Council. The society has not accepted, Rome has not pressed, and while that conversation remains suspended in the space between Econ and the Vatican, a Milan parish arranges Islamic prayer within a Catholic summer camp and receives a press release rather than a correction. Something is happening. That is what this interview establishes. Not in the register of rumor or of Catholic Twitter controversy, but in the register of a man with 5 years of doctrinal authority behind his words, choosing this moment to say them out loud. Müller's diagnosis has 2 blades, and he uses both of them. That is what makes the interview remarkable, and what makes it so difficult for either side of the current Catholic fracture to claim him as their own. He is not a traditionalist champion. He is not a progressive reformer. He is something rarer and more uncomfortable than either. He is a man who knows the tradition with technical precision and refuses to let either camp use it selectively. The progressive reading of the current moment goes roughly like this. The Church is finally listening. The Synod is opening doors that were closed for centuries. The rigid forms of the past were culturally conditioned, and the Spirit is leading the faithful toward a more inclusive, dialogical, and welcoming expression of the gospel. Tradition in this reading is a problem to be gradually resolved. The ancient Mass is a symptom of attachment to forms that no longer serve the mission. Those who cling to it are doing so out of nostalgia at best and ideology at worst. Müller does not accept this. His judgment that the suppression of the ancient rite is dogmatically unsustainable is not a concession to that framework. It is a rejection of it at the level where it matters most. The liturgical forms of the Church are not decorative containers that can be replaced when the contents feel dated. They carry doctrine within them. The lex orandi is the lex credendi. How the Church prays expresses what the Church believes. A dicastery that treats the ancient form of the Mass as a pastoral inconvenience to be managed away has not understood what liturgy is or what it does. Müller says this in the precise vocabulary of someone who has spent a lifetime studying exactly that question. But then he turns the same precision on the traditionalist camp, and the cut is just as clean. There is a version of traditionalism that has curdled into something the tradition itself cannot support. It is the version that looks at the current state of the Church, at the confusion, the doctrinal ambiguity, the gestures of inclusion that blur rather than illuminate the faith, and concludes that the institution has apostatized, that the true Church is somewhere smaller, purer, and identifiable by its rejection of everything that came after a certain date. That one bishop standing against 2,000 at a council was right and they were wrong. Müller will not grant this, not because the concerns are illegitimate. The concerns about doctrinal drift, about the confusion being generated by synodal documents, about what is happening in parishes like the one in Milan, are entirely legitimate, and he shares them. But the conclusion drawn from those concerns, that the Society of St. Pius X constitutes a remnant of the true Church, while the rest of the visible Church has fallen into error, is ecclesiologically impossible. The Church Christ founded cannot defect. The gates of hell will not prevail against her. If that promise means anything, It means that the solution to confusion within the Church cannot be the construction of a parallel structure outside it that declares itself the real thing. This is where the personal prelature proposal becomes important. It is not a bureaucratic detail, it is the concrete form of an argument. Müller is saying that there is a path that does not require the society to choose between its liturgical identity and its ecclesial communion. A personal prelature would allow the ancient rite to be maintained, the spiritual formation to continue, the sacramental life to flourish, all within the canonical structure of the Church. The condition is acceptance of the magisterium in its fullness, including the Second Vatican Council, understood in continuity with the tradition, rather than as a rupture from it. The society has not accepted this. The reasons are not simple, and Müller does not pretend they are. Decades of being treated as a problem, of watching Rome issue documents that seem to contradict the clarity of the tradition they have worked to preserve, of seeing the ancient Mass restricted while practices that Dominus Jesus would identify as contrary to the Catholic faith are described as inclusive, have produced a posture of institutional distrust that is not irrational given the history. But distrust, however understandable, cannot be the foundation of an ecclesiology. And a community built on the premise that it alone has preserved the faith intact is building on something other than the rock Christ designated. Meanwhile, Rome does not press the offer. The conversation between the Vatican and Econ remains suspended, and into that suspension flows everything else. The Milan Oratory, the synodal documents the Polish Catholics have analyzed paragraph by paragraph, the silence that follows every letter, every interview, every precise doctrinal challenge that arrives at institutional desks and produces no public response. What is left for the ordinary Catholic in all of this? Not the cardinal, not the superior general, not the theologian tracking every development in the Catholic press. The person who goes to Mass on Sunday, who is trying to raise children in the faith, who reads that a parish in Milan has told Muslim children they worship the same God, and arranged space for Islamic prayer in a Catholic oratory, and then reads that the cardinal who once guarded the Church's doctrine calls the suppression of the traditional Mass dogmatically unsustainable, and tries to locate himself in the middle of all of it. That person deserves a clear word from his pastors, not a communique that acknowledges the richness of diverse perspectives, not a press release describing inclusion and dialogue. A clear word about what the Church believes, what she has always believed, and what no pastoral initiative has the authority to revise. Müller has offered his clear word. A former prefect, a custodian of doctrine, a man with no personal stake in flattering either side, has said in print that something cannot continue as it is. Tradition is not a political position. It is not a liturgical preference. It is the life of the Church across time, the living continuity of what was revealed, defined, celebrated, and handed on. When a cardinal with Müller's credentials says out loud that this continuity is being damaged, that the damage has a name, and that neither progressive accommodation nor traditionalist separatism is the answer, something important has been said. The question is whether anyone in a position to respond will say something back. What do you think? Leave a comment below. Amen. God bless you.